Okay, then we can start. So a very warm welcome. Thank you for joining us for the Future of London Community Engagement in a COVID-19 World. My name is Nicola Mathers, I'm Chief Executive. If you're new to Future of London, we are an independent network supporting people working in planning, housing, regeneration and infrastructure across London and in Manchester. And we work in three ways: one, through supporting our next wave of city decision makers, development, through our knowledge programme, sharing inspiration, innovation, best practice across the city, and network, so bringing together cross-sector, cross-discipline groups of people with similar interests. I'm absolutely delighted that you've joined us today. This event came about through lots of questions and inquiries from our members who were asking, how is everyone doing consultation when we're all on lockdown? And our members are boroughs, housing associations, GLA, developers, private sector partners, SME. So we thought, well, we'll bring everyone together to share how they're approaching community consultation, because we want development to continue, but we also want to make sure that people get a fair opportunity to still comment on development proposals and make sure it's fair and equal for everyone. So I'm particularly passionate about this issue. I started my career in community development, community consultation. So really passionate about making sure that everyone has a voice. So we've got some fantastic speakers for you this morning who I'll introduce in just a moment. But what we'll do for you over the next hour and a half or so is show you a whole range of approaches that are being planned or are already taking place across the capital. Those with small budgets, big budgets, those being commissioned and run by the public sector and the private sector. But most importantly, probably, is we're also giving you some perspectives from community members, so people who are on receiving that community consultation and what they're thinking and their views and perceptions of how it's all going. And we've obviously got plenty of time for you to do Q&A. So let's go to, if we can do next slide, please, Safa. So this is our agenda for today. So we've got 5 presentations. We've challenged our speakers to just speak for 4 minutes and introduce themselves and the work that they're doing in London on community engagement. And I'll introduce them individually in a moment. We're then going to bring in our panel. So we've got another 4 people who are joining us. So we've got 9 people in total for you to ask Q&A. We've got lots of time for Q&A. So presentations really just give you a flavour of what they've been involved in, and then it's up for you to shape and direct the discussion according to the topics that you're really interested in. We'd really like you to join us if you're on social media. So we're at Future of LDN, and then we've got the hashtag COVID-19 and learning through crisis. Okay, shall we make a start? So first of all, next slide, please. Oh, some housekeeping. So we're recording this webinar because we had a lot more people register than we could actually accommodate in the room this morning. So we'll be sending you the link to that, and if you want to share that with colleagues or friends, then please do. If you want to submit a question, I'll show you how to do that in a moment, but you can do that at any point during the event. If you lose the collection, just click on the link that we sent you originally and you should come back on. And at the end, we'll be sending you a feedback form. We'd really appreciate it if you could fill that in, as we do take time to look at all the feedback and it helps us improve our events as we go forward. Okay, next slide, please. So just to make sure that you've got a good view, you'll see the presentations are going to be on the left and the panel is on the right, and you can toggle between and make the screen smaller or make more of the panels appear by moving that little line in the middle that's shown by the yellow circle. Next slide. And then if you want to join in with the Q&A, which we really encourage you to do, if you move your cursor to the bottom, you can see that little Q&A box, and then you can ask your question. I'd ask you to please say your name, your organisation, your question, keep it brief if possible, but importantly, who your question is aimed at on the panel. That's really important for us to be able to manage this. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I'm going to introduce our first speaker today. So Neil Sinden is director at CPRE England, London. He's an experienced policy campaigner in the environmental sector at the most senior level. He's going to be talking to us about a set of principles that he's developed with a number of organisations on how to do community consultation during COVID-19. Over to you, Neil.
Thank you, Nicola, and good morning, everybody. Very pleased to be invited to participate in this really useful webinar. A bit of more background from me about the work that we do in London. We're a campaigning charity working across the capital to protect and enhance green spaces, to engage with communities, to help revitalise the built environment, and to promote the appreciation of London's countryside. And you might feel it's slightly odd that a countryside charity is operating in London, but many of you will be aware, I'm sure, that almost 50% of London is green. We want more of it to be greener, but the built environment can be greener as well. And we're working across the board on that broad agenda. Our key focus really is to help improve decision making around London's environment for the long-term public benefit. And if we can move on to the next slide, that brings us to the focus that we have at the moment, which is we're kind of broadly describing as planning for people in the public interest, because we think that the land use planning system is vital for achieving many of the objectives that we wanted to achieve, and public engagement, effective public engagement with that system is critical too, both for the quality of the decisions and the outcomes that they deliver. Obviously, like others, we focus a lot on the National Planning Policy Framework over the last few years, and we're pleased to see public engagement explicitly recognised in relation to plan making and decision making in the NPPF. But I think it's fair to say that the provisions in the current NPPF leave a lot to be desired in terms of securing the best possible public engagement in decision making. The reason why we refocused on this issue recently, of course, is due to the introduction of the Coronavirus Act in 2020 and Section 78 with its associated regulations, which allow for virtual decision-making in the current climate. And this led us, with a number of other organisations, to get together to establish an initial set of principles for what we describe as safeguarding the public voice in planning. So if we can move to my next slide. This set of principles, as I say, has been agreed between us, the Campaign to Protect Rural England, the national organisation, as well as the London branch, an organisation called Just Space that some of you may be familiar with, and I know that there are representatives from Just Space speaking later, London Forum for Civic and Amenity Societies, and Friends of the Earth. So we got together really around concerns that we've been beginning to hear around some of the practices that local authorities were beginning to adopt in relation to decision making, which we felt left a lot to be desired in terms of effective public engagement. We were driven by a concern that short-term economic considerations to do with getting the economy going again in the post-COVID world were overriding effective public engagement in planning decisions. We'd heard that some local authorities were actually closing meetings, delegating all decisions to officers, and removing speaking rights at meetings, which gave us some cause for concern. And also we heard that some authorities were failing to publicise critical meetings as well. So I won't read these 6 key principles. I'm sorry about the number of words on this slide, but effectively we're looking at how we can encourage authorities to adopt better committee practices in a virtual world, to ensure that there is reliable streaming and speaking rights for public objectors and third-party representatives. We want councils to look at how they can foster best practice in relation to engagement and use their sort of web pages to promote how people can get better, more closely involved in decision making. And we're also asking that councils should look at extending deadlines associated with planning processes in order to allow for the unusual circumstances that we find ourselves in. So that's all for me, really, for the time being. This set of principles is really just the first step. We've had a good response from the Secretary of State for Communities in relation to this. We're looking forward to seeing how we can influence the forthcoming planning white paper to ensure that we get better public engagement in a post-COVID world than we have perhaps seen up till now. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Neil. And can I ask, I guess, if somebody wanted to go and find those principles, they could find them on your website or the Just Space website or the FOE website?
Exactly, they're all fairly easily accessible.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much, Neil. Much appreciated. Thanks for kicking us off this morning. And now we're going to hand over to Diana Pirawitty. She's Regeneration Manager at the London Borough of Croydon. And with a background in urban design and architecture, Diana's actually worked in community engagement, not just in the UK, but in South Africa and Malawi as well. So Diana, over to you to tell us what you've been up to in Croydon.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So I'm working on a town centre regeneration project, and it's a new project. A multidisciplinary consultancy team led by Urban Symbiotics was appointed in March, a week after lockdown. So the public realm is a key part of this study, but housing, development, traffic, parking, and some of the more contentious topics will be part of this work. Now, we did very much mull over this, but we can't pause at the moment on this project because the town centre is experiencing rapid change, and coronavirus hasn't stopped planning applications or pre-apps from coming in, and waiting too long could mean losing the opportunity and decided to start engagement early, but to start with some internal council engagement first. And this is because the council is quite multifaceted, with numerous colleagues who reside in our study area, but also through their work, they have quite a lot of links and intricate connections with community groups that are not always visible. So the perfect place to start bolstering our stakeholder list. For example, economic development identified some of the local businesses and those who are thriving, those who are struggling, some who are making plans for grand reopenings. And our community safety team, they put us in touch with police officers who gave us some insight on the state of things on the ground currently. And then our communities team talked about some of the new and existing voluntary groups, and also a really strong network of new neighbourhood aid groups as well, who've got some really great networks in our communities. And so this internal virtual engagement was not just about who to contact, but also about the appropriate time to engage. And the messaging of why we're engaging is also key to getting people on board at what is a very challenging time. So next slide, please. Now, I won't go into too much detail about digital engagement tools because there are quite a lot of them. But our council roadshow helped us to build a robust list of key people in the community who we'll start our initial engagement with. And our consultants will steer and we'll start that with calls and emails through to establish the best digital platforms following those initial calls and emails for moving forward. Now, in terms of physical engagement, I'll caveat that all ideas should be in line with government guidance and follow social distancing rules. But we're not proposing anything drastically new here, but these are the variations of what we might normally do with some distancing twists. And as things keep changing, we will be adapting as well. So I won't go through all of them, but the first is the humble notice board. And the one that I've shown here was put up in Nottingham during lockdown and has been very effective for both giving and collecting information. And then in Time Out, I saw this image of somebody who's been kind of writing in chalk on the ground and naming their local trees or the properties of those trees. And I thought that's quite an interesting way for people to start capturing what's in their urban environment, but also we would like to ask people to start sharing photos of their similar favorite places and maybe sharing their memories of those places before the pandemic. And then we're looking at, and I'm still exploring this idea about postcards from after the pandemic as well, because we do need to address the current situation and the impact it's having on our urban environments. And finally, quickly, queuing may become quite a strong feature in some of our lives. And the 2-meter distancing is resulting in initiatives that are experimenting with the expansion of the public realm. So this is a key time for us to start learning from some of the things that are happening in our public spaces. But also as seen in one of the images in Hackney, the queue can also be a place where we can start engaging and being quite animated in the messaging. Next slide, please. So a big part of our thought process has been when to go live with our engagement, because during early lockdown response, we felt that it was inappropriate as people were really focused on adjusting and setting up new routines and surviving. But as we go over the last couple of weeks, I'm not sure about your different councils and areas, but there's been a lot of talk about recovery, and there are aspects from our brief, such as reactivating high streets that are in sync with the mood of the country right now and the future of where we're going. And as such, we feel the time is right to start initiating some conversations about the future. So we are launching our project next week. And finally, just to touch on legacy. So this project is about creating a vision for the area, and visions are long-term and they need champions even after the consultants are gone. So we're looking at town teams and community teams, which are key to the ongoing conversation. And we're already thinking about the engagement that goes on beyond this 6-month project, and a community platform, possibly supported by funding, to allow for continuous dialogue with the wider community and delivery of some of the small-scale projects as well. So that, and we're speaking to our councillors as well so that they can share some of this ongoing work. So legacy is important in the message, and it's important to convey it now as we go live, because the risk of going live now means there could be the threat of losing trust from some of our residents, and the narrative could be about the council trying to start to sneak things in. But we want to ensure that those who are ill or those who are struggling to rebuild their businesses, some people who are just trying to survive, still have an opportunity further down the line to have a say about their area, you know, in a year's time or in 2 years' time. And that's why we want to really build that legacy. And thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Diana. That's really great, and good to hear that you're thinking about things long term. And I really liked your phrase that you were changing your consultation measures to give them distancing twists. I really like that. So thank you. Now we're going to hear from Aoife Connacher. She's Project Director at Holloway New Business Peabody, and she's going to tell you about the work that they've been doing in developing a new consultation approach for a huge scheme, Holloway Prison Redevelopment in Islington. So over to you, Aoife.
Hi, good morning, everybody, and thank you for being here today. As Nicola mentioned, I am responsible for the Holloway Prison Redevelopment Project in North London. It's a major development, also of a quite high profile site, so there's a lot of interest from the local community. And we have been working closely with the local community over the last kind of 6 to 12 months as a proposal have evolved. It's also the largest development site in Islington, so quite a lot of interest from that perspective also. We had planned to do public consultation through the spring and summer this year, so I had to take a pause on that, obviously, with the COVID-19 challenges. We were intending to submit our planning application in the autumn. Can I have the next slide, please? Also looking at a series of meanwhile uses through the summer, looking at markets, community activities on the site, and that kind of thing that we've had to postpone. We have been working closely with the council and also the GLA and with the local community. So we've had existing good relationships and good links with some of the key stakeholders. That enabled us to discuss our consultation approach and get feedback from the community and the council as we figured out really our way through it and the best way to approach consultation. With our GLA and council meetings, we were able to do video calls and virtual presentations, and these are really successful, and we're certainly really grateful for both organisations for being really accommodating in this regard. With the local community, we were doing monthly meetings, and we started then doing video calls. We're now doing those every couple of weeks, so we can keep people up to date on what we're doing and get feedback on the consultation and how the community feel that it's going. The first stage was to rebuild the project website to increase its functionality, and that would be the face of the project in effect. So we rebuilt it so that it had functionality such as being able to host videos of the project team. We've added site photography, aerial drone footage, and a virtual site tour option, which is quite cool function actually, where you can go on the site, click on various buildings, go inside the buildings, a little bit like Google Street View. So that enables the local community to see the site. We were previously planning to do site tours, but we weren't not able to do them at present. Could I have the next slide, please? So we have been working on our consultation material over the last few weeks. We were aiming to do public consultation fairly immediately, actually, on lockdown. That was just the program that we were working to pre-COVID. So we had to put a pause on that while we checked in with the project team, the community, figured out the best approach really, and whether it was possible to progress the project. As I said earlier, we discussed it with the community, agreed the approach, and we're working on the consultation material at the moment. We want this to be interactive as opposed to the standard exhibition board format. And we have team videos, online feedback forms, the option to provide feedback as you work your way through the material also. And that's the current consultation. We're planning three exhibitions in total, so I'm expecting that approach to evolve, but this is our current approach, certainly. We will be shortly sending out mail out to 10,000 local residents or local homes, and also a group of local communities, our local community groups that we've discussed with residents also, who we feel will be interested. That will be an invite to the virtual exhibition, and that invite will also provide the option of requesting a hard copy of the consultation material and the feedback forms, so that we can ensure that people that don't have access to the internet can also be involved in the consultation and provide their feedbacks as the development proposals evolve. We are also planning video calls in lieu of design workshops that we were hoping to do. We're working with the community on these, and our project team trying to figure out what is the best approach, but that's something we're committed to doing through the summer. And we're also working with some of the local schools. We were hoping to do site tours and some kind of educational activity on the site through the summer. But we're now going to try and do that remotely, and our landscape architects are working with the local schools on some ideas about how we may be able to bring local children involved in the design process on the play space, for example, which we think would be quite a fun activity and a nice thing to do generally. So that's kind of where we are at the moment. It's very much a flexible approach. As I said, we have 3 exhibitions planned. This is the first of those. We're keeping our approach very flexible, learning as we go, listening to the community, listening to feedback to try and ensure that this approach works for everybody, and certainly evolving as we go through the consultation process through the summer. I think that's all for me. I'm slightly over my time, so I'll stop talking. I would just say have a look at our project website for further information. It's www.hollowayprisonconsultation.co.uk. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Aoife. And I know when we had a chat before, you mentioned that the community were also going to be providing you feedback on how that consultation is being received within the community as well, isn't that? That's right.
Yeah, that's the plan. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. So now we'll go to Malcolm Wood, who's Project Director, Partnerships West London and Thames Valley for Countryside Properties. Malcolm has got 23 years experience on working on a variety of housing-led schemes right across London, and is really responsible for driving Countryside's commitment to running exemplary community engagement. So Malcolm, can we get you on screen, please?
Am I on screen now?
Yeah, you're good to go.
Brilliant, thank you. Good morning, everyone. There's a few aspects I want to... Firstly, a reminder that the basics haven't changed. So the communities that we're working in and I'm working in are really diverse. So they range from communities where we've got large housing estates, large regeneration projects, where we might have an established relationship with that community built up over a number of years, and we're still doing ongoing consultation. We've got schemes where we haven't started consultation yet. So each of those approaches that we'd be taking pre-COVID-19, the strategies that we'd be looking at to try and maximise engagement, I think it's still important that it's still the case. So we're not, we can't just launch into going online without thinking about the basics still. And some of those basics about how we ensure that consultation is still meaningful. So whilst we could just put the boards that were going to go up in the physical exhibition on a website, clearly it's much more than that. It's about the conversations. And we need to achieve equality, as mentioned by the other speakers. We're really conscious that some people don't have access to the internet that we do, and some people might have access but might not want to use that. So how do we make sure that we get equality across the people that we're talking to? And also reminding ourselves that it's the community and some of our partners that really help us shape some of our consultation, the way we consult. So asking people how they want to consult. So I've got a meeting next week with community board to run through on one project how we intend to consult over the next couple of months, and that feedback will be absolutely really useful to guide our approach. So next slide, please. As I've said, because our projects are different, the way we're consulting will still be different. So we're looking at and putting in place virtual exhibitions. We're putting in place webinars, workshops, so in smaller groups, all online via Zoom or other means. But in parallel, I think this is probably an important point to stress. In parallel with that, we're still looking and still producing the posted consultation booklets and the physical newsletters and the physical information that goes out to people. And that's because we want to maximize participation and recognize that some people, as I mentioned earlier, in the community might not be able to or might not want to go online. And it's those conversations that we have through our consultation that are really important during and afterwards. So it's really leading to a blend of an approach. So following up with telephone surgeries, so giving the community the ability to phone in at certain times and speak to the experts as they would do at a public exhibition, and also one-to-one phone calls afterwards. So checking in with people just to make sure that they've followed the approach, they understand it. Is there ways that we improve so we can learn from people? And the live chat functions that you would have seen on webinars and through virtual exhibitions, really valuable tool to get that interaction going. Next slide, please. So I just thought I'd share a few thoughts on how we think this might change our approach going long term. Clearly, we're learning on a daily basis. Things are changing on a daily basis. So I might have a different list next week, but at the moment, these are some thoughts. It's amazing, I think, the way that people have embraced the technology. It's certainly the people I've dealt with, and we've moved very quickly onto a world of having pre-app conversations, design review panels, planning committees online, and people are clearly getting more familiar with using the technology. So that's a real opportunity there. We can use the technology to extend the reach of our consultation. So we might be able now to talk to parts of the community might find it a little bit more difficult to talk to previously, but as I said before, we've got to remember that there are other parts of the community who might not want to engage that way. So that leads us back to the blend. I think we're going to become, or we could become, less dependent on physical spaces. So when we run a virtual exhibition now, we can keep that open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We don't need to clear up the local hall afterwards, which is a relief. And it may be more accessible. There may be some people who couldn't have attended that physical exhibition or wouldn't wanted to attend that physical exhibition previously, who are now happier to go on and look at the virtual exhibition online. We can also mix technologies a bit more easily. So in a physical exhibition, we can have a fly through, we can have a sort of virtual reality and some video screens. It's much more seamless to drop those into a webinar or an electronic exhibition. I think some things I've observed, and others may have different observations, but some people certainly, I think, are finding online video calls a little bit less intimidating than some physical meetings. There's probably a balance there. It depends on, again, each community is different. Everyone's different, aren't they? But I think I've noticed so far that probably there's a bit of a people interrupts a little less on Zoom calls than they might do in a physical meeting, and that can give some people a real voice. So there's definitely some benefits. But I suppose the important thing is the values in the conversation. So we can do amazing fly-through videos and we can embed them in webinars, and technology is fantastic, but it's those conversations we have during and after that are the real value to us, and we mustn't lose sight of that. So in summary, I see sort of using or bringing in online methods to create a blend as a real opportunity to improve the approach rather than replace it, and it will be a blend. And those are my views, and thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you very much, Malcolm. And I think probably everyone would agree with you that we're all kind of learning literally on a week-to-week basis. But it's nice to hear, and I really support your view about the importance of the conversation. And it's also because the kind of one-to-one things is fine, but actually having a conversation and listening to other views, I think is a really important part of the engagement process. So thanks for bringing that up. Okay, so our next final speaker for the panel then is Michael Francis. So he's Director of Newman Francis. Some of you no doubt will be working with Newman Francis. Michael has 25 years experience of working to help clients understand the needs of the communities they're working with. He's got an amazing track record in the delivery of community engagement strategies, both at borough level and estate level. So Michael, over to you.
Thank you, Nicola. Hello, everybody. Good morning. Yes, so like a lot of companies who specialise in community engagement, face-to-face in COVID-19 meant a massive disruption to our business. But we've got a track record in delivering engagement through digital and online platforms. So we basically submitted our non-face-to-face engagement approach to our clients, and 4 councils and 2 housing associations agreed for us to continue working. So the key principles of our approach is checking in with people, checking on their well-being. So we've been really trying to find out what matters most to them right now and how they can be supported right now. And that's been a great platform to start talking to people about their future needs and their future housing requirements, regeneration aspirations, etc. We've been doing a lot of signposting and supporting residents, so making sure that we know what's going on in the local community, especially with the voluntary sector, making sure residents can actually be targeted or supported to access services. One resident we helped claim for universal credit. And the other thing is some of the projects that we're working are very sensitive, people that have been decanted because of fires or have had to leave because of poor structures or living in really poor accommodation and waiting for regeneration. So for us, it's also about espousing their landlord's commitment to continue supporting them to get new housing. And the other focus for us was really to maximise the opportunity that we've got. I mean, we've got a captive audience, people are bored, sitting there, waiting for us to contact them. So it gave us a chance to have a deeper engagement, generate better insight about their needs, and also just spending more time with them, talking to them and really getting to understand them. And also what we've been successful in doing is a lot of those residents that we've spoken to are really willing and want to get involved throughout the process. Next slide, please. So this is just an example of some of the work that we've been doing. So online workshops for Catalyst and MTVH, and that's really about training, supporting residents around whatever project we've been involved in. We've done online interviews, so training residents online to brief them. And last week I did some interviews with residents and officers to employees agent for a real rebuild project, which was very successful. We're doing community surveys for Waltham Forest around their regeneration and really getting some insight about people's needs. And that's going to move on to looking at developing a local resident offer. We're focusing on developing the residents' charter so that residents are clear about what their needs and aspirations are. We've been doing Zoom meetings for public meetings, very interesting. I wish I had more time to talk about that. And we've also been working with steering groups, developing steering groups online, training them, and also having what we call drop-ins, where people can come in after public meetings and drop in and talk to us. So a real different array of different activities that we've been involved in. Next slide. So some of the key considerations that we've had to look at is obviously, making sure as many people can access the technology and the platforms, so really being clear about, ensuring that people have access. So whether it's actually people phoning in, going online, or even sometimes having to do one-to-ones with them, just to make sure that they can input. Also making sure that, you know, the platforms fit for purpose. We've had residents who have actually said, no, that platform's no good for us. We prefer, you know, rather than something like Zoho, which is a webinar type platform, they would like the Google Hangouts or Zoom where they can see everybody and be more interactive with people. Also looking at the value of the engagement. So, you know, is the engagement gonna identify people that are not engaging? So we found that we're getting more young people on video conferences, etc. And also looking at some of the critical parts and barriers. So one of the things is affordability. You know, have people got enough money to buy data? You know, looking at can our clients give us contact information? And also looking at professionalism. I mean, unfortunately, we've had situations in which I've literally found so funny. So, you know, we've been having meetings and like one person just sort of put a Batman mask on and the meeting just went, it was just complete, you know, breakdown in laughter. Or we've had one situation in which one of the video faces was going round and round in circles throughout the whole meeting. So again, it's about looking at how can we keep it professional, keep it successful. So that's all for me for now.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Thank you very much, Miko. And I think we'll hopefully come back to you through the Q&A just to get underneath some of those issues that you're talking about there on your final screen. Okay, if we can go to the next slide. And I'm going to introduce the panel. So obviously at any point in time, anyone can ask a Q&A. We're going to be using the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen to do that. So we're starting to get some coming in now. So please add your name, organisation, your question and who your question is aimed at. That would be really helpful. We've now got 4 engagement professionals who are going to join us for the Q&A. I'd like to introduce firstly Jane Custance, who's a very well regarded planning director working at the Borough of Waltham Forest, who's often at the forefront of innovation in terms of culture, regeneration and housing. And Jane's going to tell us about the methods that they're using in Waltham Forest.
Hello, thank you, Nicola. Yes, I'm Jane Custance from the London Borough of Waltham Forest. So I think there's a couple of things we're doing that people will probably be interested to hear about. Firstly, we've started the process of reviewing our local plan, and we were supposed to be going out for consultation over the summer, which of course isn't possible now. So we've been looking at how we can amend our statement of community involvement and what virtual engagement we can actually do from the autumn, because we probably won't be in fully out of the lockdown by then. So I think it's quite an interesting point, and something that Malcolm said, that one of our sort of traditional hard to reach groups has been younger people. So I think by having some kind of virtual engagement, we might actually be able to get a wider reach than we would have done by more traditional methods. But we've also got a significant planning application with us at the moment. It's for just shy of 600 new homes on a former gasworks site. It was sort of on the horizon before the lockdown, and residents are extremely interested in it. So we are currently looking at what we can do for our planning application consultation. So we're sending out a bespoke information pack to 2,500 residents, and we're working with the developer St William to hold a virtual engagement meeting at the end of June. So I think actually people seem to be more interested in planning at the moment than they perhaps were when they had better things to do. Thank you, Nicola.
Thanks, Jane. And then quickly now to James Cross, who's Development Manager at Southwark. And James is responsible for the Southwark strategy for consultation during COVID-19. So James, a quick introduction to you and what you're doing in Southwark.
Sure. Hi, good morning. Yes, my name's James Cross from Southwark Council. We've been running a direct delivery programme of new homes since 2015 with a politically agreed charter of principles of how we'd consult with our residents. When the COVID-19 situation broke, we did 2 things. We drafted a new strategy, which we got signed off by our politicians and leaders, and we also looked at different options we could use operationally to restart our consultation. We did give residents a bit of a breathing space, so obviously it's a very difficult time. Southwark was an area that was unfortunately quite badly hit by the pandemic. Now we are seeing some sort of green shoots of recovery. We have started speaking to residents and firstly finding out really what their needs are. So some of the project groups that we held, we'll be going back to those, asking them what their best methods of communication are. So not just assuming it's an IT by default process. And some of the comments that have been made already around ringing residents up, talking them through presentations, doing follow-up phone conversations and such is something that we put in place. And just generally placing equalities first rather than just going digital by default. That process has started for about 5 or 6 schemes now, and it's just going to be a constant review of how we will consult and feedback, and we'll be adopting our processes as and when. Key for us as well is being a council is just using local knowledge from housing officers and local groups to understand the local demographic a bit more and identify those hard to reach individuals who may need further support or encouragement to engage with us. We've also done a lot of work with our architects to make sure that those presentation boards have more a narrative to them, changing some of the uses of the language, and also making sure that our consultation radiuses are aligned with the radiuses as used for the statutory planning process. But generally it's taking a flexible process and looking at continual review and feedback from residents. Thanks.
Brilliant, thank you very much, James. And now to Jenna Goldberg, who's Director at London Communications Agency. Jenna's got 12 years experience of supporting clients across London to run consultation and engagement processes on some of the most complex, sensitive and largest regeneration programmes in the city. She's also Editor-in-Chief of the award-winning London in Short newsletter. So over to you, Jenna, to give a bit of an introduction to yourself and what you're up to at LCA.
Absolutely, thanks all. Yeah, so we at LCA advise clients across the public and private sector on schemes across pretty much all of the London boroughs. So I think I'd probably bring a sort of pan-London view and give a view of kind of how it's all working in lots of different parts of London, which is to say it works completely differently on every scheme that we work on, whether that's for a local authority, a public sector organisation, housing association, or a private developer or house builder. And depending on the borough that it's in and the street that it's on and the local demographics, all of that obviously goes into the mix. And a different approach is taken every single time. And I think a few of you have kind of touched on that already. There's certainly no one-size-fits-all approach to digital consultation, just as there was never a one-size-fits-all approach to traditional consultation. I mean, thinking about my own experience over the last few months, I would say that for every local authority, there's been a journey to go on, and that's been really interesting to see. There's certainly a slight sense of competition, I would say, amongst the boroughs in London to see sort of who can get their approach kind of straight. But obviously, it's been a real moving feast, and you know we've had new policy from government announced even just literally this morning, haven't we, on planning. I mean, if you haven't seen it, I can share a link, but MHCLG have put out new guidance on how promoting the promotion of applications and planning consultation should work under the restrictions. And so sort of just keeping up with all of that and how each borough wants to do things and feels that it's right to do things has been quite intense and very interesting to see. And we've had some boroughs who've changed their minds a few times about the types of virtual consultation that they're happy to use or the types of technology that they're happy to use. Or they said actually they don't want to consult at all during this time and then have quickly changed their minds back again. So it's really interesting across the board. I mean, a few observations. One of the things that we say to all our clients who would like to consult during this time is the first thing to do is make sure that your planning officers and your local authority is comfortable with that and the approach that you're taking, and that relationship is clearly key. The other thing is to be very mindful of, even if they are happy with that and everyone is kind of supportive, that we press on. And I think many of us probably feel a responsibility to press on during this time, because homes still need to be built and places still need to be made. But there's also that overlay of anxiety. So, we've had consultations that are going ahead, but with the knowledge that the people we're consulting with, this is quite low down on their priority list right now. even more so than it would have been before, because they've got other things to worry about and think about. And I think a few of the contributors sort of mentioned that, you know, they're caring for people or worrying about their businesses and livelihoods. So actually saying that, you know, a tower might go up behind them is just an added stress that we really need to be careful about at the moment. For me, that's probably the most important point to bear in mind through all of this. In terms of sort of moving from traditional to digital, I think that's slightly a misnomer and a bit of a red herring. That journey has been taking place for a while now, and I think that the days of sort of easels in town halls were probably numbered, and if we can accelerate away from that because of this, then all the better. I sort of keep observing to clients that more than ever now, we know where people are. So actually finding them, reaching them, you would have thought, be simpler than it was before. Everybody's at home, so we can find ways to reach them. But I think it's that the tricky bit is that sort of level of anxiety, and actually people just don't want to think about planning and change. You know, we've all had enough change, and we're facing enough change. So the idea of any more change to the built environment around us can be really quite concerning, and that's where we're having to be really sensitive.
Great, that's fantastic. Thanks very much, Jenna. I'm sure there'll be some more questions coming your way in the Q&A. Okay, now finally to Eileen Cond, founder and coordinator of Peckham Vision. We're really fortunate to have Eileen with us. She's been amazing support to us and has hosted visits for us down to Peckham. She was awarded an MBE in 2009 for services to the community and has been an absolute pioneer in terms of community engagement in the planning system. So Eileen, a bit of an introduction from you and a little bit about what you've been doing and your experience in Peckham.
Thank you very much, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me here. It's a great opportunity to have a voice from the community amongst all these professionals. And I'd just like to say that I'm a long-standing resident of Peckham, and I've been involved in community engagement of one sort or another now for over 40 years in the planning, policing and environmental world. And so that's where my experience comes from. Yes, I'm currently coordinator of Peckham Vision, which is a community action group in Peckham. And we have we reckon about 12,000 people within a couple of miles that follow our information, because basically what we do is get information about the planning process in our area, and also because I coordinate the Southwark Planning Network across the borough, and find ways in which that information can be put out to people who are not interested in planning, but they're very interested in their neighborhoods and what's happening to it. And we have also, we use social media a lot, Twitter and Facebook. I do recommend that people have a look at what we're doing there. Our handle is @PeckhamVision. And we have a website where we archive everything that we can. We also have lots of community events, which of course have completely stopped. We have a shop and a studio, and they've all had to close. And we're thinking about what on earth we can do in the future. At the moment, we're not quite sure. But what we have been spending our time doing in the last 2 months is working very hard with people across the borough in community groups to influence the way the council handles virtual decision making. And it was to start with, the first one we had was the cabinet, which was dealing with a number of planning policy issues. And there was no thought about having online approaches, but we managed within a few days to get that made into online. It actually worked. And there was a first planning committee that was virtual a couple of weeks ago that seems to have worked. Of course, what's very concerning about the digital world, which has great advantages, I agree with some of the things that have been said, is the people who do not have access to digital processes. And one of the ideas that I've had myself, which I've been putting into the council now, is that we identify places across the borough where it would be possible to have social distancing and where there's good technical equipment and there are staff on the premises, and that they can be advertised as places where people can go where meetings are being held online, so that they can take part in the meetings in those public places, but supervised. Obviously, not the kind of meeting you can just turn up at, as we all know anyway now in Zoom. But I'd like to just sort of say something about the approach that we take. I was a Whitehall civil servant for much of my working life, and I'm passionate about bringing local knowledge and information into the policy process. And I don't think that we do it at all well enough. I believe that healthy democracy also needs informed active citizens. But for this, there needs to be an understanding that the community isn't an amorphous blob, but it's a sophisticated and very different kind of social system with horizontal peer networking as its essence. My paper about this you can find on the web under the title Community Engagement in the Social Ecosystem Dance. As a community activist, I've been working for a long time to develop organizational and social infrastructure in that community system. The extraordinary time that we find ourselves in right now in this global public health emergency is just the moment to explore and innovate to transform the relationships between the community system and the planning and development worlds. It's a moment for step change to collaborative ones for better policies and decisions for sustainable neighborhoods, which is really the other crisis that we've got, that we don't have sustainable neighborhoods, nor are we going to, in our view, in the planning system. I feel that this is the moment when we can really have some changes. And I have to say, in Southwark Council, we've had some really excellent progress in the last 2 years in the organised community sector in Southwark, meeting regularly with the officers from planning policy, from community engagement and from public health, where we're all talking about the implications of planning across the borough and how we can work together to make the processes much better. So it's in that context that we've been able to have also an influence on some of the things that the planning department is now thinking about in terms of handling all the consultation processes, which have had to be paused at the moment. I'll stop there for the moment.
Okay, thank you very much, Eileen. That's really appreciated. And of course, that sort of change and influence does involve a lot of energy and enthusiasm and time from the community. I bet Southwark are lucky to have you in their borough helping drive that change. We're going to now bring in all of the speakers that we had earlier. They're going to start appearing on the screen now. As I mentioned, please do send in your questions through the Q&A function at the bottom. I'm going to start now, and just to let, in case you're watching and wondering, Eileen doesn't have a video camera, so that's why you can see a very nice picture of her instead. Okay, so I'm going to ask a question from Catherine M. For anyone, but especially Diana and Aoife, do you have any further reflections on the level of willingness and capacity of the community to participate at that time? And that's Catherine Max, Health and Sustainability Consultant. So question to Diana and Aoife on capacity, but I guess if anyone else wants to answer that, then just kind of wave their hands.
I'll just go first. We have been very much led by representatives of the community that we meet with and talk to very regularly, so they've got kind of a feeling as to what's going on in the wider community. There definitely seems to be a willingness, and perhaps, I suppose it depends on people's individual circumstances, but some people perhaps have more time to be able to engage at the moment. And some people obviously have, depending on the personal circumstances, may have other things going on, and it's a particularly difficult time for some people, I'm sure. What we have done in response to feedback from the community is extended the consultation feedback period, so people have more time to review the material and provide their comments back to us. Yeah, and as I said earlier, we're continuing to work with the community representatives on that to see how they feel it's going and what changes need to be made as we go through the process.
Diana.
Yeah, so I'd add that part of the sort of initial building that stakeholder list, and I sort of mentioned that our economic development team was really key to giving us an understanding of where businesses are. So we have done through our kind of internal roadshow, finding out the current situation with our different community groups. And for example, sort of our neighborhood aid groups, my local one initially was talking about, you know, supporting people who are self-isolating, but now the conversations are around supporting the reopening of businesses and local businesses. So we really are gauging as we go along through our various networks, what people are thinking. And also through our initial phone calls that we start next week, that will be a time to also start to gauge with people where they are and where their head's at, and also the appropriateness of timing for asking them certain questions. So I think it is a adapting and changing thing, but we can only speak to people about how they're feeling, and representatives of sort of community groups as well, to see whether it's appropriate to have some conversations and their willingness to engage.
Yeah, and Jenna, you mentioned the sensitivities around this issue, didn't you, around people having a lot more other priorities in their life. I don't know if you want to add into that as well.
Yeah, I will do. And I saw in the Q&A box, someone has asked specifically about that, and sort of how do you, how can you manage or sort of be sensitive to that anxiety when lives are at risk? And a few things to say on that. So firstly, I agree with Aoife. So time is crucial, and things do take longer, and you have to give people longer than you may have otherwise liked to. And that means, submission timetable targets have to be pushed, and I think everyone understands that that's the right and fair thing to do. And I think on the other thing is a sort of human face. So we talk a lot about digital engagement, social media, whizzy websites, all of that stuff, and it's great. But obviously there's no sort of comparison for a human face and voice, and being able to ask questions and have them answered by a person in real time. And a phone call feels like an anachronism at this point, because we're all so used to being on Zoom. But actually, we're working on a very sensitive scheme in Hammersmith and Fulham, which is a sort of, I would say, kind of more traditional borough, more sort of sensitive to its local needs than perhaps some others. And it's a sensitive scheme we're working on for a public sector organisation. We've set up a hotline, and you can phone it and you can speak to a person and you can ask them questions. And that's not digital engagement in the way that we perhaps are all thinking about it, but it's really important, more important than ever. And one of the other ways we're also doing that using technology is having architects or members of the project team film pieces like this in their own home, and that's quite easy to do. Actually, it's quite low tech, but if you can have a person talk through a project rather than sort of have to read about it or work your way through sort of graphics or architectural drawing, and that really helps as well. But I think time and humanity are the key.
Thank you, Jenna. Does anyone else want to come in on this, or should we go to the next question, which I think is really interesting actually? Has anyone had, so this is from Sasha Gordon, has anyone had experience of developers or local planning authorities funding IT literacy as part of the engagement outreach to improve accessibility? If so, are there any good examples, or what are the lessons? Anyone come across that? Which I think is a really nice way of kind of bringing in two things about increasing skills and increasing reach of engagement, but doesn't look like anyone's had any experience of that.
I can offer some
Malcolm.
Nicola. One of the schemes I'm working on, certainly a local authority, it's very early days, but is investigating a voucher scheme to try and help people get online, and it's very early days, but it's certainly been looked at. And I think one of the other aspects, it's not only sort of the financial help you might need to give people to get online, it's also that training and breaking down, sort of building capacity for people to use those services. So certainly one thing that we've got in place is having technical advisors that are standing on by to make phone calls to members of the community to help them through the problems they might have. And also we've been looking at separate sessions to try and get people equipped, sort of just as we would do capacity building in a normal pre-COVID world, an added aspect in terms of being able to use modern technology to their advantage.
Okay, thanks. James, did you want to come in on that as well?
I was just going to mention briefly that Southwark does have an organisation called Southwark Reach, which has been running sort of small IT courses around its sort of tenants and residents associations. So I'm going to follow up from this and actually link in with those and just see how we can link the COVID-19 situation with those groups and perhaps bring a few things together. So that's a very useful point, actually. Thank you.
And just to add to that thought, I don't know if it was James or Jenna earlier mentioned that it's not digital by default, and the key is having that, what we're doing is going in with those initial phone calls to find out what the appropriate platform to use later on might be, instead of kind of investing in something beforehand that might not work.
Okay, thank you.
Nicola, I was also going to add that, I mean, one of the things, we have spent a lot of time doing dummy runs with residents, checking in to make sure residents have got the technology, working out if they can't use it, can they get in access by phone, and really hand-holding people, especially that doing it for the first time, so that they can be effective.
Okay, thank you. So Alan Wright, prompted by Eileen's comments on the processes happening on the ground, question to Jenna and or Neil and Mikor and perhaps others about the reach of digital consultation. We hear that a lot of digital reaches a wider audience compared with more traditional face-to-face exhibitions, but are there any stats on the numbers reached and the demographic and the demographics? Likewise, any information about groups who are not able to engage during digital media and during lockdown, and what are the options working to reach these groups? And that's Alan Wright from BPTW, one of our sponsors.
I mean, it's a great question, and I think we're all learning. Is my sort of short response. And I mean, there is anecdotal evidence, you know, that there is much more engagement, for example, in planning committees as a result of you know, the opportunities to join meetings virtually rather than in you know, physically. And I think that's really interesting. I think what we would like to do along with our partners in the sort of third sector really is to over the next few months gather evidence about how the virtual world is actually adding value to the decision making and policy development process in this way. As well as you know, the gaps where people aren't you know, able to access digital processes. And I think the point that Eileen made about looking at how local authorities can actually provide sort of safe spaces for people to not only you know, use IT to engage in with these meetings and these virtual consultation processes, but also to get training in those spaces in a kind of safe way, to actually enable them to do that more effectively. I think that's a really, really interesting and valuable avenue to explore. I mean, I suppose I just wanted to come back to our main concern about all this, though, is that you know, decisions are being taken. You know, they're often quite critical decisions, and you know, we're hearing kind of more and more evidence of those decisions being taken in rather suspect ways, actually, really, and risking the possibility of legal challenge down the line. And you know, we've been participating in seminars offered by lawyers and so on, and reading some of the legal guidance around all this, and it's quite interesting, you know, that for example, one of the briefings I read is that the advice from lawyers is that planning committee members should not be using a private chat bar during meetings to communicate with each other, because that risks them actually making decisions that would be flawed legally. And I think, you know, that there's some really quite detailed considerations here that I think local planning authorities in particular need to be taking account of, particularly with the thrust of the new guidance coming out this morning, which we fear is actually going to make it potentially even riskier for local authorities to adopt sort of shortcut decision-making processes in terms of their likelihood of being open to legal challenge.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Neil.
Just an observation to add to that, which is that I agree sort of anecdotally. I've got a consultation live in Barnet at the moment where sort of my instinct is that engagement has been higher than it normally would be. Obviously, I haven't crunched the numbers, and I'm sure it's quite early days generally for sort of data-driven evidence on all of this. I think it'll be really interesting, because I suspect you've got this rebalancing of the usual demographics who get involved in planning. So from the, you know, I'm sure those of us who have staffed sort of consultation events are used to sort of grey-haired brigade, probably people who perhaps, you know, don't work full time, and we can all, you know, there are cliches and some are there for a reason, but it'd be, you know, really interesting to see if that's changing through this. I suspect it is quite significantly, and that is probably a good thing, as long as we can make sure that it's you know, it's well balanced and we're reaching the harder to reach communities. I mean, I think this is an area where actually the local authorities and the developers and the communities all have a vested interest in in doing some of this research. And I think this could be somewhere where we could, it's one of the very few areas that actually they would all benefit from the same piece of work, and actually being on the same page here to really understand who is getting involved and the balance of it.
Yeah, I think that would be an amazing piece of research. Miko, did you want to add this?
Yeah, I was just going to, an example of, we've been doing a community survey at Waltham Forest on one of the regeneration projects there. We've probably covered about 130 people so far, doing really well. And what we found was, out of that 130, 70% had never been engaged before. They'd never gone to any of the meetings. And this regeneration's been going on for, I think, the best part of a year and a half. And out of that, 50% for our conversations wants to be involved. Some of them want to be involved in the steering group, etc. So, and I know this was just mostly phoning, etc. But it just shows that this is a different approach, and this actually has got more people to the table.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Jane.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what Neil said, really. I think what this crisis has done is kind of force us into a more digital form of engagement that we probably wouldn't have tried otherwise, because we didn't think we could do it. So I think we are managing to reach a wider number of people and a different demographic. And just on the planning committee point, generally I would say, probably only get about 10 members of the public attending, unless it's a really contentious scheme. But at our last meeting, we had over 60 people attending online. So there's a significant increase in the interest that people are taking in planning. And I've got a fairly small scheme in the north of the borough at the moment, where the sort of feedback from one particular resident was that nobody knew about the application because of the current crisis. And we've had over 70 letters and emails in. So, I think there's a real benefit in this digital world, and it's something that we should look at adding to our normal forms of consultation, rather than just moving completely away from it when we all get back to normal.
Absolutely. I've just lost the question. I suppose we have to ask this question. What's been the impact on budgets of going virtual, digital, having to rethink consultation? Who would like to answer that question? Yeah, Jenna?
I can do, because obviously I've got sort of experience from sort of lots of different sort of projects and schemes across the board. I mean, as you might expect, it's an impossible question to answer. There are some savings from not, having to hire spaces and create materials, and then there are some extra costs because you have to create some really compelling sort of interactive materials. So I don't think there's a huge amount in it, I have to say, and that's just from the last 8 weeks of experience, so that's not scientific at all, but I think savings that you make on one side you probably lose on the other by having to just go that extra mile and reach people and giving extra time and all of that, which all costs money.
Yeah. Does anyone else want to come in on that question around budgets?
Yeah, for us, it'd be much cheaper, because we've saved so much time of, going out to meetings, when you're going door knocking and, someone's not in, etc., etc. So we looked at, again, on one of our surveys, but each survey was probably taking about 25 minutes. But if we had done it the more traditional approach, it probably would have taken 45 minutes. So that means now that we've got more time in the budget to spend talking to other people, and also looking at other ways, like, doing more one-to-ones on the phone, etc. So for us, it's been actually better because we've been able to do more work.
Okay. Thank you. There's a question here from Abu Bakr Bahari, I think it is, and maybe it would be good to get Eileen, as well as Miko and others, to answer this question. How would you address engaging people with disabilities and people with language barriers? And I guess this is a question that we're all tackling, before COVID, but what maybe is this sort of the nuances of working in this new way?
I've got something I'd like to say on that. I was going to say it on one of the previous questions, and that is that in each borough, certainly in our borough, there are many organisations, voluntary sector organisations, that are dealing directly with people with all kinds of issues, whether it's disabilities, mental health, asylum seekers, people with language difficulties. They have direct access to these people. Many of these people are the ones who don't have digital access. And I've thought for a very long time that what we need to do is to have an organized system so that anything which is digitally being produced, we work out with those organizations the way in which they can get those messages through directly to their clients. It's the obvious way to do it. And if you couple it with the suggestion I made earlier about identifying public spaces, of course, some of them may well have the spaces where they can do social distancing. That could be coupled with organizing the meetings. I think it's been obvious for a very long time to me, even with email, before we had things like Zoom, this was not being developed properly. All the digital stuff that was coming out by email should also be going out to the people who didn't have email, but they do have access to all these special organizations. So I think that while it might be difficult to put it into into progress now, it's certainly something that has to go on. It's obvious that Zoom, like this conference that we're having now, couldn't have happened without it. And so we're going to go on doing these kinds of things, but we've got to supplement it for the many millions of people who do not have good digital access. And we need to search out the ways in which people are in communication with them anyway, and find ways in which those people who are professionals can use their professional expertise to get the message through to their clients.
Absolutely, and I think the answers are in the community themselves, aren't they? And asking different groups how they want to be engaged with, which is what we've been hearing a bit about. Does anyone else want to answer the question about, there's another question about elderly people as well, so elderly people with disabilities, people with language barriers. Any experience that people have had of targeting those particular groups over the last 2 months or so?
Not over the last 2 months, but I'll just give you some example, because we have been using this technology in the past. So for instance, we was working in Havering to looking at health facilities and what the community's requirements were. And as Elaine said, we went to particular service providers. In this respect, it was a provider that was working with disabled people and people with learning difficulties. And so we did a video and we sent them a video. So the video talked about the consultation. It got people to see who we are. And then through the support of their service providers, we was able to work with them to get people's feedback. We've had situations in which we've used video conferencing with people with language barriers so they could use the facilities, and we've used Google Translate and shared screens and done things like that. So you can get away from it, but I think predominantly it really is about trying to understand how best that community will engage, and then obviously putting whatever's needed in place to enable that to happen.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, can I just add to that? I think it's same rules apply in terms of when we are physically engaging, going to specific places where certain community groups meet, or people like Eileen mentioned, they're organizations and voluntary organizations who've got access to people who we might not necessarily meet at our kind of normal engagement sessions. So it is about kind of mapping that out and understanding where you go to disseminate that further information, and whether, as Miko said, that's through videos, translated videos, or other methods. It has to be planned in our sort of initial engagement strategies.
I'd just like to add a point on that, though, because of course these voluntary groups are the ones that don't have very much resources themselves.
Yes. Yeah.
If we're going to do this kind of thing, there will have to be some kind of provision.
Yes.
To pay the voluntary organisations to do this extra work.
That's a very good point. Thank you, Eileen. Let's have another question. There's a question from Kathy Bacon from Southern Housing Group. I'd be interested to hear experiences of the panel or any speakers on the use of online consultation platforms like Commonplace. Have you experienced any that have worked particularly well?
Could I say something from a resident's point of view? I think the problems with some of these things, which are technically very sophisticated, is that they don't, in my experience yet, give the opportunity for the people who are making contributions to dialogue with each other. One puts up static comments and that's it. It's very frustrating from a community point of view. There's no virtual space where people can have interactions with each other.
Yeah. And I think that goes to Malcolm's point, doesn't it, about the importance of conversation. I think that, you know, some of the tools are incredibly good at getting quantitative data and engaging maybe young people that can engage 24 hours a day, but it doesn't beat the conversation that is also an important part of consultation.
Yeah, we used Commonplace on one of our projects in Hackney. It was a very sensitive project, and the reason we used Commonplace is because obviously it was an opportunity to actually have a transparent community engagement discussion. What we did find though was to really make it effective, we did a lot of work on the ground with people that wouldn't register, especially different communities. So we actually surveyed them and actually put their information online. So you actually got a comprehensive discussion about the regeneration. And then actually we used a lot of those themes in meetings, in workshops, and also to create principles around the regeneration. So that was quite useful. So we found it was very effective, but I'd like to say that, you know, Numa France was the people on the ground generating as much information as possible, and Commonplace was up there in the cloud, you know, providing, you know, oversight and sharing information. So it can be, and we've done something very, very similar just for our website for Croydon, when we worked on their small sites. So we was doing a lot of work around the pre-engagement before planning, and that worked effectively as well by using web forms, getting people to respond on web forms, and then taking that information and responding back to especially community groups.
Yeah. Okay, does anyone else want to come in on that one? We'll go to our next question. There was a question here about engaging with young people, actually. Let me see if I can find that. Well, let's go to the question, which is for Jane, but maybe also for James. Can you tell us more about your programme of engagement for your local plan review and what methods you are intending to use?
Yeah, we have to bear in mind that the local plan is quite a long-running project, so hopefully this will just be kind of a short period in the whole consultation process. But we have already done 2 issues and options consultations and got significantly more feedback than we were expecting. So we've just finished completing our consultation report that we'll be publishing online. But we'd actually employed a community engagement officer through the public practice programme. So we've got Jessica Carhill-Thompson, who sort of joined us at the beginning of April to sort of help us on this journey of really going out and engaging with people. And we've had to have a complete rethink. So through the process that we had already, we've got residents to sign up to e-newsletters that we've been sending out. And we've managed to get fairly active community groups who are we've got representatives of a wide range of community groups in the 3 different areas of the borough that we split the plan into, so north, central and south. And we're able to engage with them quite positively. And I think what's interesting is, you know, I've been doing planning for an awful long time, and normally when you do a local plan engagement, it's like sort of being a stand-up comedian playing to a dead audience, whereas in Waltham Forest the residents are completely the opposite, and they've really sort of come on the journey with us, and we're having to consequently put a lot of effort into the material that we're producing and showing to them and actually engaging. So we'll be, as I say, we're doing we will be engaged in a virtual meeting on a development scheme that we've got in the pipeline in June, and we'll be using that as a test for some of the local plan engagement that we're going to do. But following on from what other people have said, one of the key problems that we've had with consultations of engagement events is finding a venue that's big enough to accommodate all of the people who want to come along. So being able to do it virtually, I think gives more people the opportunity to engage with us, but also kind of prevents the loudest voice in the room taking things over, and we'll be able to kind of more consistently show information to residents and others than we would have done previously, I think, where we were splitting people down into sort of individual tables and they were all getting an individual view of it. But I take Eileen's point that you want engagement. You don't want to be, having the planning authority talking and then not being able to give people the opportunity to comment and come back to us.
Okay, thank you. Let's go. I was going to say maybe one question, but maybe a question to the entire panel, and we'll just give you a sort of a last word. From everything that you've heard, what do you think that we will be taking forward in a kind of a post-COVID? So what do you think has been the biggest impact of COVID-19 on consultation? And that could be how we're working now or how we're working in the future. And I'll go to Jenna first because you slightly nodded, so I took that as a sign.
I mean, the first thing that springs to mind is the sort of public sector, local authorities' embrace of technology and the sort of that catalyst for change. And it I'm sure has been quite painful for those who've been involved, but it can only be a good thing, as I think it democratizes the whole process. And obviously we can't rely on digital technology as the only tool, but it's a very important tool, and it will open up this process to a lot more people. So yeah, I think that can only be a good thing that can come out of this.
Thank you. Eileen, can I come to you next? Neil?
Yeah, I agree very much. It's not just local authority. We, in fact, were asking the local authority, the officials that we work with in the liaison group that we've set up on planning and public health, we were asking for a Zoom meeting before they had any capacity whatsoever to do it. So, but it's transformed our way of working as well across the borough in the community groups, because we also now have as many Zoom meetings as everybody else. But it has focused our minds really a lot on what to do about the millions of people who still don't have digital access. So I think that I'm sure that there are ways in which we can do that, but I think it needs some concerted effort going on into the future.
Okay, thank you. Can I go to Neil? Yeah.
Yeah, just picking up on that point from Eileen, I think that was my first response really to this question. Is I think this moment gives us an opportunity to think again about the challenges and the opportunities of getting better public engagement in decision making. And it's it's been a fascinating discussion this morning, and I think there are some sort of pluses and negatives coming out of it. And on the plus side, obviously the opportunities that we now have to engage many more people in virtual processes is obvious from the anecdotes that we've heard from various participants. But on the challenging side, I think the disadvantaged communities that don't have access to the kind of technology that many of us have access to, they're going to be even more disadvantaged as a result of perhaps a shift towards more virtual processes. But the bigger point that I just wanted to throw in and is around around the opportunity we have, if you like, to step back and rethink what we need from our built environment, our urban environment, our green spaces and our public realm within London. And I think it's clear that many people over the last few weeks have been sort of rediscovering the value and significance of green spaces on their doorstep. There are many communities that don't have that easy access. That we need to look at how that can be improved. We also need to look at, from my own organisation's point of view, we need to look at how we can repurpose the public realm as well, to make it more more inclusive and more beneficial. And the obvious thing there is that I think, what's the figure? Something like a third of London streets aren't wide enough to allow effective social distancing. So there's a real issue there. And then there's the whole issue of how do we avoid a resurgence of car use in central London as well, by making it easier for people to walk and cycle when public transport isn't going to be that attractive in the short term. So that sort of getting a kind of an opportunity to engage the public in those kinds of bigger strategic long-term decisions about planning for the future of the urban environment, I think is a really interesting interesting one.
Okay, thank you. Who would like to go next?
I was just going to say one point really was just we talked about a few different software packages, and obviously we all sort of learned to use Zoom very quickly and MS Teams and things, and maybe there's an opportunity now for software developers and people who write this kind of software to look at what we need and other organisations need to make sure that we can probably facilitate two-way communication, software that older people can use without lots of features on and things like that. And if something like that can be born out of this sort of process of change, then that will enable us to do what we want to do a bit better as well, and have the right tools to do what we want to deliver.
Thank you very much. Aoife?
I was just going to say, I mean, my personal big takeaway at the moment is just like the value of having an interactive project website, and wondering to myself why we haven't done it before, because it makes it more convenient for people to interact with the public exhibition, you know, if they don't want to spend their Thursday evening coming to the local community hall, if they have plans. And that's something that's quite easy to do, and I think it's something we'll do going forward on our development proposals. Also, just the option of sending out a pack by post to people, which is a very easy thing to do, and it just enables people to actually have the convenience of being able to access the consultation material and the feedback forms without having to go to a certain venue or without having to have internet access. So I think they're two quite easy things to do going forward, and something I think that we'll look to do, and that's been a lesson so far for me personally.
Okay, thank you. Diana?
I think it's been a great way for opening up new methods in which we can engage, and like creating platforms to allow, I think we talked about the youth voice to become even more engaged in some of our projects. I'd say my only worry is I think there's very little that can replace that face-to-face interaction, some of the nuances you see from, you know, somebody standing next to you, and just having a conversation aside with somebody within the context of other people and having that debate. I think we really need to be alert that there are things that we are missing from this process, and also to be incredibly aware that the internet is a privilege, and there are people who will be missing out from this, and just kind of finding ways that we can physically be out there in our green spaces, in our supermarkets, places where there's footfall, to still try and capture those people that maybe they just don't want to be on their phone and they've had enough of Zoom and Teams.
No, I like that. Just very quickly, then we've got Jane, then Malcolm, and then Mikal.
Well, not to sort of duplicate what other people have said, I think really the big lesson for me is how much time you really need to put aside to properly engage with people. So, you know, we've been spending a lot more time putting information packs together, answering emails, and thinking about how we can engage with people. And I think perhaps previously we haven't been putting enough effort in.
Okay, Malcolm?
Yeah, so I think, as I said, I think it is about a blend, and I think it's a great opportunity, but I think we can't lose sight of the equality. And I've been looking at the questions that have been coming in from the various sort of viewers today, and that's come up a lot, hasn't it, about how we make sure that we can continue that equality. So I think that's the technology is well advanced, and it's not new in many cases. We're just using it a bit more, but we need to probably focus on how we make sure that the traditional methods blend with the digital methods to prevent any inequalities, which echoes a lot of what others have said, of course.
Thank you, Malcolm. And then finally, Mikal.
I echo what Jenna said in terms of embracing technology, but I think that needs to go further. I think it's about making sure that people can afford to use the equipment in terms of buying data. You know, landlords investing in equipment, you know, probably providing laptops for people on steering groups, looking at rolling out equipment at libraries so people can go into your local library and use it. So I think there's a lot of things that we need to think about to actually ensure that people can embrace it. But again, I think face-to-face, the normal, traditional way is still going to be there. And you can still use that. Posting that information is one of the feedbacks. One of the groups said to us, please post all the papers first, because we can't, you know, go from screen to screen. It's things like that to think about. But overall, for us, we found out that it's quicker. I mean, we do a lot of traveling, and just, you know, one meeting, an hour meeting could cost me 6 hours in traveling. Now I've got 6 hours to spend with that group.
Okay, thank you very much. So it just leaves me to thank all of our panelists and our speakers this morning. I think that's been a fascinating journey through all kinds of different projects that are going on across London, different viewpoints. I think that's been amazing. I obviously have to thank our sponsors as well. So this came out of our Council-led Housing Forum, which is sponsored by Potter Raper, Redloft and BPTW. So thank you very much to them. And thank you very much to the team. There's lots of people beavering around in the background to make this happen so smoothly. So thanks very much to the team. Just before I thank you all for joining us, what's next for Future of London? We've got our PRS forum event on the 21st of May for borough enforcement officers. We've got our next Leading Through Crisis podcast with Beck Seeley from Lend-Lease coming out, and then our next Council-led Housing Forum event on project inception and planning for those who are in boroughs or arm's length organisations working on housing delivery. This event has been also part of our Learning from Crisis programme, where we're looking at sharing how organisations are delivering and managing the here and now. So this event being one of those, and then also looking to the future and thinking about what the legacy of COVID-19 is going to be on our city. So please have a look at that webpage and get involved. We'd love to hear from you. So finally, just to say thanks ever so much for joining us this morning. I hope you've had a really interesting morning, and I hope to see you at another Zoom event very soon. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.